Hello to our friends joining us via recording. We are going to wrap up lesson number 7 from lab. Primarily today's session is going to focus on bone markings, some of those movements, some of the muscles of the thorax and abdomen, as well as some of the actions of muscles. So when we are looking at some of the bones that you're learning this week, we are learning the bones of the chest. So things like the ribs, things like the sternum and clavicle. But then we're also learning the bones of the pelvis. So when we talk about the bones of the pelvis, the first thing that we need to be familiar with are the 3 different bones that make up the pelvis. So I'm going to take my pencil here and I'm going to circle. So we've got one bone that's here kind of in the front. We've got one bone that's a little bit more in the back. And I apologize, we'll look at this in 3D, that'll be easier to see. One bone too then, that's all the way at the very top. Okay, so I used 3 different colors here. Help me out in the chat. Which bone did I color green? Which one did I circle with green? Do we know? Yeah, so the green one that we circled here is the ilium. When we talk about the red one, do we know which one the red one is? Yeah, the red one is the ischium, which means by process of elimination that the third one, the blue one, is the pubis. Now we do see a couple other bones that are on this picture and we can identify those as well. The sacrum is the bone that I find in the back of the pelvis. So that holds the 2 halves of the pelvis together in the back. So here we'll circle our sacrum, give that one more color too. Oops. Here's my sacrum in the back and my sacrum right here. Did I just highlight that for you guys? Can you see that too, or is it just me? Maybe it's just me. Okay. Okay, you can see it too. Weird. Okay, so I got my sacrum as the bone that holds the 2 halves of the pelvis together. And then down here at the very bottom that I accidentally circled before, this little guy right here is the coccyx. So my last bone here, the coccyx, we'll make that orange, I guess. That's your little tailbone. The good thing about the coccyx is there's no bone markings that we have to know about the coccyx. We just need to know that it's the tailbone. It's the one here in the very back. On each of my other bones, you can see listed here, yeah, it's your new favorite, Nicole. Yeah. On each of these other bones that we're learning in the pelvis, we do have to know specific bone markings. And if you have had a chance to look over the lab homework assignment, you'll notice that when we're identifying bone markings, you have to give us 2 parts to its name. So you have to give us the specific name of the bone marking and the name of the bone that it's found on. That is going to be the naming convention that you're going to see going forward. That's what you're going to see when you take the final exam. What you're going to notice starting next week is on your drop-down menu of potential bone markings and of bone names, you're going to see the names of all of the new bone markings and the names of the bone markings from this week. So what I'm trying to communicate is that the list of bone markings is going to keep getting longer and longer, which means we need to know inside and out the name of the bone marking we're looking for. So it's kind of like if we were taking our lab in person, I would give you a word bank, a physical word bank that listed all of the bone markings. Maybe what I can do if you're interested is post that word bank for you. It shows you all the names of the bone markings that are going to be listed in your drop-down menu. If you don't know what you're looking for, anything looks like it could be right. So please make sure we're studying which bones each of these markings go on and make sure we feel kind of confident about them. When I'm looking at the pelvic girdle, when I'm looking at the hip bones, first thing we got to do is we got to know where each of these bones are found. We talked about this back in week 1. The ilium bone is the bone when you put your hands on your hips, you're touching the ilium. The ischium is the part of the hips that you sit on. And the pubis is the part in the pubic region in the front. So 3 big bones, ilium, ischium toward the back, and pubis more toward the front, that are the 3 main bones of the pelvic girdle. Of the bone markings that we need to know for these bones, a couple of them are ones that we really like that shouldn't be terrible for us. The first one that shouldn't be terrible for us is this one right here, the iliac crest. So this word crest, here's where I make a plug for that activity that we did at the end right before the midterm exam, where we sorted out those meaning words, what they were. Does anyone happen to remember which category a crest fell into? Yeah, Nicole's totally right. A crest is a projection or something that sticks out. Notice when I'm looking at, let me get a color here. When I'm looking at my list of bone markings, I've got an iliac crest, I've got a pubic crest, I've got a median sacral crest. Anytime you see that word crest, we know automatically we're looking for something that sticks out. Now, the iliac crest, this iliac part of its name, tells me that I'm going to find it on the ilium bone. That's the only one that iliac could work on. So when I'm looking for the iliac crest, I'm looking for the part of the ilium that sticks out. That's this top part up here, the iliac crest. Again, to go back to the example that we said before, the iliac crest is what you're putting your hands on when you put your hands on your hip. So the ilium bone with its iliac crest, that is where you put your hands when you put your hands on your hip. The pubic crest is going to be something that sticks out on the pubic bone. The pubic bone is the bone here in the front of the hip. The pubic crest, I'll draw for us, is kind of a circle right here. See how there's kind of, I'm going to try to circle it a bit. There's kind of some parts that stick out a little bit on the pubic bone. The pubic crest are the sticking out parts on the front of the pubic bone. Again, crest means something that sticks out, pubic crest. The median sacral crest is something that I can't actually see in this view of the pelvis. The median sacral crest is going to be on the back side of the sacrum. Not a trick question. Where on the back side, based on this word and its name, where on the back side of the sacrum is going to be found? What does this word tell me? Yeah, it means in the middle. So in a moment here, we're going to rotate to the side. The median sacral crest is the stuff that sticks out when we are looking on the back side, sticks out in the middle of the sacrum. Hey, here's another word. Let me pick another color. Another word that we talked about last time when we were doing bone marking words. Foramen and foramina just means more than one foramen. What did this word foramen or foramina mean? What did that word mean? Yeah, that is a word that means a hole. So when we're talking about the hips, two main holes for us to be familiar with. The obturator foramen, which is found in the pubis bone. Hey, the obturator foramen is this really big hole that I see right here. So the large hole, we will come back to this in lab when we talk about the spinal cord. This obturator foramen is the place where the obturator nerve goes through. So this big hole is a space for blood vessels and for nerves, the obturator foramen, this big hole that I see here. The sacral foramina means I have more than one hole. That's what foramen means, more than one hole in the sacrum. And you can see when you look at the sacrum, all of the little sacral foramina. All of these little foramina are again holes for nerves. So nerves actually travel inside the sacrum. The spinal cord sticks down inside the sacrum. And these are little holes where some of those nerves come out of inside the sacrum. So foramina or foramen always means a hole. Crest always means something that sticks out. Something that we're just going to have to memorize because it's a funky word. But the funky word we're going to have to memorize is this one right here, acetabulum. The acetabulum is the divot that makes up our hip joint. So the acetabulum is right here. If someone dislocates their hip, the head of the femur has popped out of the acetabulum of the hip. And the acetabulum is actually an indentation that I see in all three of my pubic bones. So this indentation here called the acetabulum, that's where the head of the femur would be found, making us the hip joint. Ooh, here, let's see if anyone happens to remember. What was the regional term for the hips? Does anyone happen to remember that word? The regional term for the hips. Yeah, it was the coxal region. So the coxal joint is the technical name for where the acetabulum is and where the head of the femur goes into it. Yeah, so Nicole asked, is there just one acetabulum? Yes, there's one acetabulum that is one big indentation. The acetabulum is found on, it's actually technically found inside the ilium, the ischium, and the pubis. All three of these bones actually contribute to the acetabulum. So that would be a bone marking that you could say is on any of these three. It's all the same thing. And we'll see it better from this side. There's just one more thing we have to label here, pubic symphysis. And the pubic symphysis, if you remember from your tissue location and function guide, this was a place where I had fibrocartilage connective tissue, the pubic symphysis. So the pubic symphysis is this right here in the middle. Yellow is probably not the best idea. It's this marking here in the middle. We'll go back over it with orange. That's probably not any better. Oh well. See this cartilage connective tissue that's connecting the two halves, the two pubic bones. That's the pubic symphysis. So there's my bone markings from the front. The one that we could not see before was the median sacral crest. The median sacral crest. And that is, if you look on either side of the pelvis here, see these bumps that are sticking up on my sacrum, these bumps that are sticking up on the sacrum, those are the median sacral crest. By the way, I know this picture is a little bit funky. This is where we have to kind of start thinking 3D. When I'm looking at my picture here, on the picture on the left side of my screen, toward the middle of the screen is anterior. On my other one, we got anterior there. Posterior is behind both of them, posterior. And the best way for you to make sense of that is by looking at where that coccyx is and where the sacrum are. Those are both always in the back. The pubic bone is always going to be toward the front. Okay, so I've got my sacrum back here. We can see, I'll just point to them really fast, the stuff that makes up the median sacral crest, all of those little bumps on there. My sacrum's good. Now we're up to the acetabulum. The acetabulum is the indentation for the hip joint. That's this place right here. This divot that I see here, and I can see it from over here as well. This divot is the acetabulum. Remind me again, this word Obturator Foramen. What am I looking for with a foramen? What kind of marking is that? Yeah, foramen is a hole. So my obturator foramen is this big hole that you see right here. And I see it over here as well, the obturator foramen. Hey, look, we've got a word spine. A spine is a lot like a crest. A spine is something that's going to stick out, just like a crest does. So we've got the ischial spine on the ischium, but also something called the ischial tuberosity. I really like the ischial tuberosity because this is the bone marking that you sit on. When you sit down, this is the part of your hips that you're actually sitting on. So quick reminder, here's my ilium bone up here, excuse me, my pubic bone toward the front, my ischium bone here in the back. The ischial tuberosity is this big place right here that you sit on. So if you sit for too long, here's what starts to bug you, the ischial tuberosity. The ischial spine A spine is a projection that's a little bit sharper than a tuberosity. Here's my little ischial spine up here. So superior above my ischial tuberosity. Tuberosities are wider. You can sit on this one, the ischial tuberosity. The ischial spine is going to be important for the attachment of muscles, the ischial spine. We already talked about the iliac crest. Can you guys here with me do me a favor? Grab that pencil and show me where the iliac crest is on either of my hips here. Where do we find that iliac crest? Yep, there we go. So the iliac crest, absolutely. It's this entire crest thing here. It's all this stuff that sticks up. Iliac crest, where we put our hands on our hips, iliac crest. One other bone marking for us to mention is the greater sciatic notch. The greater sciatic notch is going to be another one that's important for us when we talk about the spinal cord and the nerves that leave the spinal cord. The greater sciatic notch is the place where the sciatic nerve leaves the spinal cord. So the sciatic nerve, as your textbook will call it, is the largest and longest nerve in the body. It's a really big nerve. I need to have a notch or a special space for that nerve to go down into the legs. So this indentation that I see right here and this indentation that I see right here, both of these indentations are called the greater sciatic notch. The greater sciatic notch. There's a question in the chat. Can you see the sacral foramina in the side view? Maybe. It might be these little things we see right here, possibly. You can definitely see them better in the other view, though, which is why we didn't list them on this particular view, because it's tough to see them here. You know where it's going to be even better to see them, though? Let me get my computer set up for this. Is in visible body. So here's when I'm going to pull out visible body for us. Let me pull up my skeleton, and then I'll share my screen. All right, it's loading. Let's get it sharing while it's loading. It's taking its sweet time, as I'm sure it does on your computer too. Give me an idea. Have we had a chance to play around in invisible body with this stuff yet? Thumbs up, thumbs down, not yet? Okay, yeah, so a couple of us have. Awesome. I mentioned it this morning. I really think that bone markings and muscle stuff, this is where visible body is really going to shine. This is where it's really going to help us, because we don't have the 3D models at home for you to play with like you'd have in the lab. So this is your chance to have a 3D model. So we are working on hip stuff. I'm going to scroll in here. It's going mighty slow. Sorry about that. Okay. So when I'm looking at the hip, my 3D rendering, it's been a little bit since I played with it. Okay. So when I'm looking at the hip, I'm going to start here. What should the name of this bone be up here in the front when I click on it? What name are we expecting on this one up here? What bone's in the front? Yeah, it should be the pubic bone, right? The pubis. So up here is my pubis bone. Now, we mentioned this in the instructions. This shows me here's the extent of my pubis bone. So it's the one that's in the front that extends down a little bit. This one it connects to back here is that ischium bone that we talked about. Let me rotate around to show you guys. The ischium bone, notice, is the one that you sit on. So this part right here is what you would be sitting on. There's my ischial tuberosity. Up above it is the ischial spine. So the ischium is attached to the pubis that I see right here. Pubis and ischium. And up above all of them is this guy up here, the ilium bone. Now notice when I have these bones highlighted, See right here, I've got this hip thing right here that says details. I click on this bone right here. It's going to pull the ischium, or excuse me, we're looking at the ilium right now, pull the ilium out by itself so that I can see those particular bone markings on it. Now you'll have to, I rotated it around to show you guys, here's what we were looking at. So imagine that the pubic bone is here in the front, that's what we were just looking at, and the ischium bone is down below. So this region in here, let's see, yep, they've got it tagged for us. This is the little bit of contribution that the ilium makes to that acetabulum, to the divot where the hip bone is. We also were learning the iliac crest, so the upper part of the iliac bone. We have the iliac crest up here. We were also learning that part called the greater sciatic notch, the place where that sciatic nerve would leave out of the ilium. I think that was all our bone markings on the ilium, right? Did I miss any on the ilium? No notes. We got them all. Perfect. Okay, so I'm going to leave my ilium alone. We found our ilium bone markings. We're going to click exit. I'm going to go back. Now I want to look at that ischium, the part that I sit on. So here comes my ischium bone. Now remember, we want to think about it the way that it was attached before. So the iliac bone was up here and the pubis would be toward the front. So notice I'm clicking right here on part of my acetabulum right here. But really what we most care about in this view is that ischial tuberosity, that part that we sit on, and that ischial spine that sticks out. So I full disclosure, I wish they didn't pull the hip bones apart for this, but try to imagine when you go from seeing all of them together into the bone by itself, imagine where those things are. Let me go back to our last one here. Pubic bone. Really I know it's confusing. I'm so sorry. Actually, you want to know what I did is I sent an email directly to Visible Body and I was like, come on guys, like surely we can make this work with them together. Like it shouldn't be this hard. So we'll see if anything ever changes. But I literally wrote them an email about this because I was a little bit sad. Okay, pubic bone. All we really care about with the pubic bone is this pubic crest. Oh, that's the tubercle. Crest is the part right here. Or not. Okay, maybe they don't have pubic, there we go, pubic crest labeled. So the pubic crest is the part that sticks out toward the front. And let me see if they put a tag on it. Not really. The Obturator Foramen, because it's a hole, foramen is my space right here. So there are my bone markings of, we technically call these, let me type it in the chat for us here. Those three bones we just looked at, they're named together. They're technically called os coxae. That's the ilium, ischium, oops, spell it right for you, ischium and pubis together. Coxal region, the fact that it's the os coxae, the hip bones there. All right, let me zoom out and turn our skeleton around to look at the sacrum. Okay, now on the sacrum right now, I've got a whole lot of ligaments that are kind of obstructing my view. So I'm going to take off some of these guys here just to see things better. Perfect. Okay, so now I am looking at the sacrum. Here's the sacrum bone. I'm going to go into the bone markings on the sacrum. When I look at the sacrum, the bone markings that you care about is this median sacral crest. I guess they're calling the, let me go to the line where they put them all together, the tubercles. The median sacral crest that includes those little bumps, and then all of these sacral foramina, the holes. Where's my little holes? There we go. So they labeled the holes one by one. We're not going to make you know them one by one. All of my holes, sacral foramina, and then my median sacral crest here in the middle. I'll mention, let me see if they, oops, they labeled it for us. Nope. These guys up here, okay, they labeled them something. Notice how they called these the superior articular processes. Even though we're not learning this word, this particular bone marking, it's a process, so we know that it's something that sticks out. By the way, with any of these bone markings, notice how we're using those directional terms. They're back to haunt us. Superior. What does superior mean when I use that word superior? Yeah, exactly. Superior means above. It's up top. So I've got the superior articular processes. These are going to be the parts that are up high that help me to form an articulation, which is known as a joint. That's the fancy word for a joint, is an articulation. If we are looking at the superior ones, there must also be inferior ones. Let me see if I can find the inferior ones right there. Well, that's inferior angles. The same idea applies right here. Inferior, superior. Hey, this has got that word lateral, so that means toward the outside. So you can do your mad scientist skills here and use those directional terms to help you figure out where things are. Sacrum. Go back just to show you our last little friend here, the coccyx. There's the coccyx. No bone markings on him. We're happy. Fun fact about the coccyx is that it's actually made of fused vertebrae. So notice when we look at this one here, it kind of looks like it's maybe 3 or 4 little bones that are all connected together. Those are the tail bones or the coccyx. They all fuse together for us. How do we feel about the pelvis? What questions do we still have about the pelvis? Oops, I did not want to. I got rid of my pelvis. Let's bring him back. Or I got rid of my coccyx. So Jacqueline had the question when she's having trouble telling, are you talking about the Blackboard homework or the visible body homework? For the crest. Okay, the Blackboard homework. So I would say from the lateral view, it's most likely to be pointing to the crest. We can't really see those foramina super clearly from the side view. We can see them much better from the front view or from the fully on the back view if I'm looking from here, if I take off all those ligaments again. So I'm much more likely to see it either from the back. Oh, that was not what I meant to do. Undo that. Much more likely to see it from the back. Much more likely to see it from the front, not really from the side. I get a little dissection happy, right, when I'm playing here at the visible body. I'm just saying, guys, I really like visible body because it's a lot of fun. Yeah, Nicole's like, that's how I do too. You go too nuts and then you realize, oh my gosh, I just lost what I was looking for. So there we go. That's better. Okay. Other things that I'll mention that we're learning this week, we are learning the thoracic cage, which is the bones of the chest. So when we're looking at the bones of the chest, we have 3 different, there it goes again, man. Okay, we have 3 different, can I hide this? Yeah, okay. 3 different kinds of ribs. So the first kind of ribs that we have, and these are the ribs that are, let me just turn it around, we'll start from the front. The first kind of ribs that we have are what we call the true ribs. So the true ribs are ribs that connect directly to the sternum, directly to the middle chest. So the true ribs, we can look at them here. Notice how we get to, let's see if I can drag it. We get to right here. Let me see if I picked the right one. Nope, it's number 8. We get down here to rib number 8. And my ribs no longer connect to the sternum directly. So a true rib is a rib that has, it's called costal cartilage. Costal cartilage is the special kind of cartilage that only ribs have. A true rib, that costal cartilage goes from the bone directly to the sternum. That's a true rib. A false rib is a rib that has costal cartilage, except that cartilage connects to other cartilage to get back to the sternum. So a false rib doesn't go all the way to the sternum. It only goes to somebody else's cartilage. In particular, it's going to the cartilage from the 7th rib. So the 7th rib is the last one that goes up here and connects to the sternum. My ones down below it, 8, 9, 10, these guys are what we call false ribs because their cartilage connects directly to the costal cartilage. And then we've got some ribs on the back side. Zoom out a little bit. Then we've got the ribs on the back side that you can see right here, number 11 and number 12. These two ribs don't even try to connect to the sternum. These last two ribs here, they're called floating ribs. Floating ribs don't try to connect to the sternum at all. So 8, 9, and 10, I can see them right here. Rib number 8, number 9, and number 10. These ones try to connect to the sternum. The way that they connect to the sternum is using the cartilage of number 7 right here. Number 1 through number 7, all of those guys are true ribs. They attach to the sternum. When we talk about the sternum, there are 3 parts to it. Let's see if how many of us have had a chance to work on this. When I'm talking about the main part of the sternum here, what's the name of the biggest part of the sternum? What's this part called? Do we know yet? Yeah, so this is the body of the sternum. The largest part of the sternum is the body of it. We've got this little tiny thing right here. This is one of my favorites, the xiphoid process. The xiphoid process of the sternum is a little bony extension down here. It's something that we actually have to be really careful for when we're doing CPR to not break it and send it into the organs of the chest. So little xiphoid process down here. Then we've got the big body up above it. At the very top of the sternum is this region here called the manubrium. So the manubrium, the body, the xiphoid process. All of my true ribs connect to the body or the manubrium of the sternum. My false ribs just connect to that cartilage. When I look at the clavicle, that's my collarbone, there's just 2 bone markings that we want you guys to know. So I'm going to blow it up here so we can look at it. The 2 bone markings that we want you to know are the sternal end and the acromial end. Hey, this is not a trick question. Over here is my sternal end. What is the sternal end going to be next to? The sternal end? Yeah, it's not a trick. It's going to be next to the sternum. So the sternal end is by the sternum. The acromial end is by a bone marking called the acromion. Hey, remember how we talked about the acromial region and how that was the top of the shoulder? So it got its name because there's a bone marking called the acromion up there. And this is the part of the clavicle that meets up with this projection called the acromion that's going to allow us to form part of your shoulder joint. So let me show you. I'm going to exit out of here. When I look at, here's the clavicle that we just looked at. Back behind it in your back is your scapula. So I'll rotate around a little bit. Here's that shoulder blade. So on the shoulder blade, let's pull them up. I'm still working on this. We'll perfect this soon. When we look at the top of the shoulder blade, so we've got this big thing here that you feel when you feel your shoulders. That's called the spine of the scapula. But at the very end of the spine, there we go, the very end of the spine of the scapula, I see this little extension right here that sticks up. This is the acromion. So the acromion is where the clavicle meets the scapula back here. So the acromion sticks out. The acromial end of the scapula is touching it. The sternal end of the clavicle is the one that's touching the sternum. So just 2 markings. Let me mention for you in your notes when you're trying to figure out which is which. Let me just pull it up really fast to see it by itself. The sternal end is going to be a lot more straight, so kind of straight up and down. When you look at the acromial end, I feel like in your notes packet it almost kind of looks smushed, or it's a little bit more rounded. So it's a little more flat and skinny as opposed to something that's maybe a little bit more square on that sternal end. So when you're practicing identifying it on the blackboard homework, that's what I would say. Think about the acromial end is a little bit flatter, a little bit rounder. The sternal end is a little bit more straight. Were there any other, I guess the hyoid bone, was that the only other bone we had this week that we were learning, the hyoid bone? Hyoid bone is hiding way up in the neck. Hyoid bone, let's see if I can find him or if I have to dissect for him. He's up a little higher. Okay, we're taking out the mandible. It's gone. Fun while we knew ya. Okay. The hyoid bone, ooh, look at those roots of the teeth, guys. Look at how legit that is. Yikes. Talk about a root canal. There's those roots. Okay. I'm having too much fun with this. Apologies. Hide from me. Okay. The hyoid bone is this guy right here. I'm going to have to take away some of these impressive teeth. Yeah, sorry, Tyranny, I'm going to take away those teeth. Just take off that mandible and you can see it too, man. These are legit. These roots are awesome. Okay, here's the hyoid bone. It lives in the upper part of your throat. All you need to know with the hyoid bone is where it's found in that upper throat, and you need to know what it looks like. So let me just click on it and we'll do it by itself. That might help us. There we go. Here's what the hyoid bone looks like. So the hyoid bone has two places on it. We're not making you learn the bone markings, but it's got two parts that kind of stick up on it. So we've got the lesser horns, and we have some tubercles where it articulates, and in the front, we find those greater horns too. Where'd they go? I don't know, I lost them. But the hyoid bone here, you just want to recognize that what it looks like. So two places here with those lesser horns, and it sticks up toward the back. The hyoid bone is really important in attaching muscles for swallowing and for talking. So throat muscle stuff is all attached to this hyoid bone here. Hyoid bone lives up here in the neck, the hyoid bone. Before we move on to muscles, what questions can I help you answer? Or give me a thumbs up if we're okay for the moment. Zoom out a bit. Perfect. Okay. So what I'm going to do then is I'm going to, instead of looking at the muscles in the muscle man, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back one here, and we're going to look at those muscles in terms of movement. So let me show you. Hopefully you've already found this. We're here in week 8 in our lab. I'm going to go down here. See how I've got this thing here that says extra resources. And it's the actions of these muscles that we're learning this week. So I'm going to click here on my extra resources, and this is pulling up for me a 3D view of each of the processes that we need to learn this week, the muscles that are involved in doing these things. So one of the things that we asked you in the movements for you to know this week was inhalation and exhalation. When we talk about inhalation, does that make the size of your chest cavity bigger or smaller? Does inhalation make the chest cavity bigger or smaller? Yeah, when we inhale, our chest cavity gets bigger. So when we're trying to figure out whether a muscle helps me to inhale or exhale, we kind of want to think about, is this muscle going to pull my rib cage out for inhalation, or is it going to push my rib cage in when I'm exhaling? Because exhaling is when you use your muscles and use your connective tissue to squeeze the carbon dioxide out of your lungs. So let's look at inhalation and exhalation, keeping in mind that what makes the chest get bigger versus smaller is going to contribute to this process. So let me zoom in here. When I talk about muscles that assist with the process of inhalation, we're not going to make you guys learn several of these, but one of them that we want you to learn are our intercostal muscles that take part in this. So the external intercostals, this word intercostal means that it's in between the ribs. The external intercostals are the ones that are found on the outside in between the ribs. The external intercostals, they're attached here. Let me show you for our reference. Underneath the external intercostals are actually internal intercostals. They'd be on the inside of the rib cage. So these are more superficial. When they contract, they pull the ribs out toward the outside of the body. Maybe someone can help me out. It's been a little bit since I played with this. How do I animate it? Does anyone know? Because this is supposed to show me the process. I should have played with it more before class today. Yeah, you didn't know we can do it. It's really cool if I can get it to do its thing. Let's see. Let me try another one really fast. Okay, got it. So these ones right here are not going to help me with inhalation, exhalation. Show me. This shows you the muscles that do each thing. So when you want to check yourself, this one shows the muscles right here. You guys told me that inhalation expands the size of the chest cavity. So check this out. It's hard to see. Let me stop zooming and we'll watch it. Inhalation is when the chest cavity gets bigger. So the process of inhalation from the beginning to the end, inhalation is when we go up. When I pull my ribs up, that's going to involve the muscles we mostly care about, these guys right here, the external intercostals. They pull on the ribs and pull those ribs outward. Muscles we're not going to make you learn that are also involved in this process, things like pectoralis minor. We mentioned this one during our lesson this morning. Things like one you're going to learn called serratus anterior. The main one for you guys to know, though, when this process of inhalation is occurring, where the chest gets bigger, the big one is this guy right here, external intercostals, the most superficial layer of the muscles in between the chest cavity. So the process of inhalation, external intercostals, making the chest cavity bigger. Let's go down here to the process of depressing the ribs or making the chest cavity smaller. When I talk about making the chest cavity smaller, that's the work of my muscles that are inside the cage. So making the chest cavity smaller is the internal intercostals. They pull on the ribs. They're found on the inside of the ribs and pull those ribs back down. I should have mentioned when we talk about the process of inhalation and exhalation, the other one for us to be familiar with is the diaphragm. The diaphragm is kind of involved in both processes. Mostly, we're going to say that the diaphragm is involved in the process of inhalation, because when your diaphragm contracts, it pulls down and makes more space in your chest cavity. So the diaphragm would be one that we're going to consider being part of the process of inhalation, because it expands down, making more space in the chest cavity. So diaphragm, external intercostals assist with inhaling, making the chest cavity bigger. My external intercostal, I mixed those up, didn't I? External intercostals and diaphragm. I'll type that in the chat. External intercostals plus diaphragm. These guys are my ones that assist with the process of inhalation, making the chest cavity bigger. My primary one that assists with exhalation, internal intercostals. Intercostals. So there's my process of inhale and exhale, making the chest cavity bigger or making the chest cavity smaller. Let's go over and look at some of the other movements that we need to know. We need to know, I'm freaking myself out here, clicking on the wrong screen. We need to know which muscles do spine flexion. Remind me in the chat when I use the word flexion, what does flexion mean? What's going on in flexion? Yeah, in flexion, the angle between two things decreases. We're bringing things closer together. When I do spine flexion, I'm bringing my rib cage toward my pelvis. Spine flexion, when the spine bends closer to the pelvis. When we're talking about my muscles that assist with spine flexion, one of the big ones is the external oblique, because it attaches to the spine and it pulls it down toward the front. The other one let me see, there, I don't really show it here. The other one that assists with spine flexion is the one that's parallel to the midline of the body. So the rectus abdominis muscle also assists with flexion of the spine. So rectus abdominis and the external oblique, the way they attach pulls my spine forward. When I'm looking at muscles that only attach on the side, we can also pull those muscles down laterally. So lateral flexion is when you bend toward the side. Lateral flexion is going to be the work of external obliques as well. So lateral flexion toward the side. Rectus abdominis is my big one that does the forward flexion, as well as my obliques assisting with that. Notice we can find our other obliques hiding inside there. So my obliques at an angle assisting with the process of lateral flexion. Let me see really fast. So fun fact, I guess it's not involved in this process. Dr. Aulis, not fun fact actually. Dr. Aulis has had some terrible issues with back problems since we went online. Actually, here it is. The muscle in me that always tenses up and gives me insane problems is this guy right here, quadratus lumborum. So this guy right here tenses up like nobody's business. And then like I can't move to the side and like I can't move at all. So I go to the chiropractor and like he presses on it. And then he also presses on, let me zoom out here. He presses on my adductor muscles on the opposite side of the leg. Because if this guy gets angry, then my muscles on the other side of the body try to compensate and give me major problems. And so, fun fact, quadratus lumborum, not friendly to Dr. Aulis. Yeah, so Jacqueline's asking in the chat, when we talk about the functions of the muscles, primarily when we think about forward or lateral flexion, I want you guys primarily to learn that the external obliques are primarily involved in this lateral flexion. That's the big thing for them. The big muscle that we're going to say does forward flexion, because it's the prime mover of it, the one that does most of it, is going to be rectus abdominis. So rectus abdominis, prime mover of forward spine flexion. Lateral flexion of the spine, that's when the obliques come into play. So the obliques mainly do lateral flexion. They help a little bit with regular flexion, but also lateral flexion is their big one here. Regular flexion, lateral flexion, mention rotation as well. That's one more movement that we ask you guys to know. Should not be a surprise for us that involved in lateral rotation and rotating things, my ones that are at an angle can rotate. And if I sneak inside, let's see if I can get inside to see. The other one that we haven't talked a lot about that assists me with that would also be muscles that are called the transversus abdominis muscle. That one would also assist with this back and forth rotation. So rotation, primarily again, obliques. So obliques do rotation, lateral flexion. Rectus abdominis does forward flexion, back and forth. I was curious if my angry muscle is in here too. Maybe he's not. Oh, again, I'm looking at the wrong screen. Okay, let me check to make sure. Okay, so how do we feel about our movements? Based on what we just did here, how do we feel about movements? Are there any movement questions you want to ask me? Feeling a lot better, good. I know I'd seen a question in the chat that had asked if these stay available after the due date. I don't know for sure. Let me see if I can find out for you. We'll go into an old one. Oh, let's see. This should have one in it. Let's see if it lets me in. Okay, perfect. So this still lets me in. So I can still go and click on these extra resources. So you should be able to go through and still use the resources. Let me go back here. Oh, I should be in student mode though, shouldn't I? Sorry. It's gonna look a little different for you. Okay, so I can still get into an old assignment. That should mean that no matter what, you guys can get into these animations and get into these dissection views. If you find out that's not the case, let me know, and I can change the due date on all of these extra resource assignments so that you would still be able to get into them. So what I mean by that is right here, technically, these extra resources in practice technically say they're due on the 16th, but I think they'll stay open for you where you can go in and keep playing with them. We just can't get a grade on the assignment. Oh, good. I'm glad to hear that it's helpful for you. I really, like I said, I really think that this is the time of the semester where this is really going to help. By the way, I know I had somebody tell me in office hours when they were taking the midterm that they had a moment where they're like, this is kind of fun. I decided just for kicks and giggles to do this assignment right here, the bones and muscles of the thorax and abdomen, to get me ready for teaching class today. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is fun. So hopefully you guys have a little bit of fun with it too. So this is your assignment due Friday for lab. It's really simple, identifying the bone markings, identifying the muscles. So it's a dissection quiz. You're going to start seeing, I think, let me scroll down. When we get down here to like week number 10, there are actually going to be multiple assignments for us to complete. So notice that I've got an assignment related to the brain because that'll be the main thing we're covering that week, but we're also covering the bones and muscles of the head. So I will do my best to make sure to remind you guys when we have more than one visible body assignment, but check for these little things right here, these little check mark things. Those are the ones that are graded. So this week, right here, we're looking at week number 10 coming up in the future. In week number 10, we've got 2 assignments with a check mark. Those 2 are graded. Right now, we're up in week number 8. There's only 1 check mark assignment for week number 8 right here. So that's the one we have to do by Friday. But start watching as we start covering more stuff. You will see multiple assignments pop up for each week to help you chunk up that information a little bit. What I want to make sure we have time to do is what you guys had requested about that last page, the activity on that last page with the skeleton. So let me go back to my PowerPoint here so that we can do that together. Okay, so page 11 of your lab packet looks like this. We should define some terminology before we start this activity, just so we're familiar with it. There are 2 kinds of places where muscles attach to bones. We have places that are called the origin of a muscle and places that are called the insertion of a muscle. For my friends who've had a chance to work on lab a little bit, can you help me out with this? When I talk about the origin of a muscle, or when I talk about the insertion of a muscle, which of these are the places that a muscle attaches to that moves when a muscle contraction happens? Which of these attachment sites moves when muscle contraction happens? Yeah, I picked the one with the long name, right? Insertions are the place where muscle attaches that moves. Any insertions of a muscle, when you contract that muscle, something's going to move. At the same time, if I've got something that's moving, I also need to have some stuff that is not moving, attachment sites that don't move, and those are called the origins. So an origin is a place where muscle attaches with no movement. So my origin is going to be where I attach my muscle, nothing moves. My insertion is going to be where I attach the muscle that is going to move. Those are terms that we should underline, highlight, star. We need to make sure that we know the difference between an origin and an insertion. Origins never move, insertions always do. Here's why this matters. because I can use the locations of the origins and the insertions of a muscle to predict its actions. Let's walk through this together. So when I talk about the origin, well, first we're going to do a muscle called Rectus Abdominis. Rectus Abdominis. Let's use our discussion from class this morning. This word abdominis, what does that tell me? What does the abdominis word tell me about this muscle? Yeah, my abdominis word tells me where I find it. I'm going to find it in the abdominal region. This is one of my many muscles in the abdominal region. The rectus part of its name, what did we say that rectus word meant this morning? What did we say rectus means? Yeah, this word rectus means parallel. So I should probably add these notes here. Okay, so the word rectus, yeah, absolutely, it's a direction word. It's a direction word that means parallel. So in the case of rectus abdominis, it's things that are parallel to the spine, for example, or parallel to the region that I find it in. And the abdominis word is a regional term for being found in the abdomen. Rectus abdominis tells me its direction, tells me where it's found. I'm looking at a muscle that's here in the abdominal region. This is that one when you're learning to identify them. This is the one that goes up and down, rectus abdominis. Okay, so rectus abdominis has origins and it has insertions. The origin of rectus abdominis is that bone marking that we were learning called the pubic crest, and also the pubic symphysis. So the first thing I'm going to do on my skeleton here is I'm going to get a blue colored pencil or blue pen or something like that, and I'm going to mark the pubic crest and the pubic symphysis. Remember, the pubic crest was in the front of the pubic bone. The pubic symphysis held the two halves of the pelvis together. I've marked my location that is the origin of the rectus abdominis muscle. Now I need to mark my locations that are the insertion of rectus abdominis. It's the other place that rectus abdominis attaches. I need to mark the xiphoid process of the sternum, and I need to mark some of the costal cartilages. Now I need you guys to help me out in the chat. Where do we find the xiphoid process of the sternum? Is it top, bottom, or middle of the sternum? Where's the xiphoid process of the sternum? Yeah, that's the thing at the very bottom, right? So I'm gonna color right on top of it. That little point on the bottom of the sternum, that's the xiphoid process. And then we're also attaching to the costal cartilages of ribs 5 through 7. I'm going to try to count it. Watch me count wrong. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so 5's around here, 6 and 7. So let's see if I can draw just a little line. 7, 6, 5. We'll say it's about like this. Okay. I have drawn my origins of this muscle. I have drawn my insertions of this muscle. Now we get to do the kindergarten thing, and we get to connect the dots. Woohoo! So I'm going to pick one more color to represent my muscle. Connecting my origin to my insertion. I've just drawn for myself what the rectus abdominis muscle looks like. I have its origin right here. I have its insertion up here. If you know where the origin of something is and where the insertion of something is, you can always predict its action. And here's something that we need to write down for us in our notes. Underline, highlight, star. I'm gonna type it here in all caps. In a muscle contraction, the insertion moves toward the origin. I'm gonna have to remove this, toward the origin. Okay, let's do some rearranging. In a muscle contraction, the insertion moves toward the origin. Every single time. It doesn't matter what the insertion is. It doesn't matter what the origin is. Whenever muscle contraction happens, the insertion always moves toward the origin. So let's look at my skeleton over here and my rectus abdominis muscle that I see right here. When I do the process of muscle contraction, I'm always moving my insertion toward my origin. Here's my two options for what could happen when I contract this muscle, when I move my insertion toward my origin. Which of these is going to happen when I contract this muscle? Based on our sketch here, am I going to move the pelvis or am I going to move the rib cage? Based on our rule, who's moving? Yeah, so we're a little hesitant, but we are correct. What I'm going to move during muscle contraction is the part that I've drawn in green. I'm going to move my rib cage toward my pelvis because my pelvis is the origin of this muscle. My pelvis is the place where I attach that there is no movement when my muscle contracts. So this part's going to stay still. My insertion is the place that I attach that's going to move. My rib cage is where I attach that's moving. So remember how we were talking about muscles that assist me with the process of flexing the spine or flexing the rib cage forward? One of them is rectus abdominis because that insertion moves toward the origin. We're not in class, so doing this is even less awkward. What I would encourage you to do every time you have a question like this is I would encourage you to find these bone markings on your own body and think about what it looks like or what it feels like when you bring them closer together. So even if you just find where your sternum is and feel your sternum and generally find where your pubic bone would be, then we know that the sternum is moving closer to the pubic bone. That's going to allow us to predict the kind of action that we could do. The sternum is going to move closer to the pubic bone. The only way I can do that on my body is by flexing the spine, by pulling the rib cage is how we phrased it here, or by moving the upper part of the body forward. So this activity, all it comes down to is using those bone markings that you're learning in this packet to predict what action might happen. Because that's the biggest picture with us learning muscles and learning bone markings. The goal is for us to go through and predict some of these actions. I could give you a huge table that tells you 20 million different things that muscles do. What I would much rather you be able to do is make predictions for me. I would much rather you be able to use those words that we talked about this morning, things like flexion, extension, abduction, those kind of things, to predict the kinds of movements that muscles do. And how we make those predictions is using my origins and my insertions. Help me out in the chat. What are we thinking right now or feeling? How are we feeling? Yeah, Christina says she needs more practice. That's totally fair. This is definitely something that is going to take practice. Yeah, Tierney's mind blown. I feel that too. Here, watch. I'm going to give you guys some practice. I'm going to draw on my skeleton a new set of origins and insertions. Origin, insertion. I want you on your own body. I want you to feel this general location of an origin, feel this general location of an insertion, and I want you to figure out what movement is happening when this muscle that I just made up, connect the dots, right? Connect the dots with the muscle here. I want you to tell me what movement this made up muscle would do. Jacqueline's voting flexion. What do we think? Do we agree? Yeah, we're agreeing. Okay, so that's half the battle. We know the name of the movement word, flexion. Help me out though. Is it flexion of the humerus or flexion of the radius and the ulna? Who's moving? Yeah, who's moving are these guys down here, radius and the ulna, because that's where the insertion is. The insertion always moves toward the origin. Insertion always moves toward the origin. So this setup, again, when you feel it on yourself, you can tell when I bring this closer to here, I'm doing flexion, I'm making my angle smaller, and what I need to identify is who's actually moving. And who's actually moving is the radius and the ulna. Hey, check this out. I'm going to clear my whiteboard here. If, and this is not the way it is, but say this was the way it is, if I told you that this is my insertion and this is my origin, draw my little muscle here, what would we say our action is now? What would our action be now if I did it like this? Yeah, so Nicole's saying, if this is my origin, this is the part that moves. And so if this is the moving part, what's moving is the pelvis instead of the rib cage. So if I had told you that this was the insertion, the moving part, my correct answer would have been the pelvis moving. But remember, my insertion, as we have it listed here, is actually up on the rib cage. The insertion, the moving part, is up here, which means that the origin is down here. I messed with your mind, right? Because that's opposite. So here, let's go back to what we did before, just so that we don't forget. Here's that insertion up here at top that we already drew. Here's our origin down here at the bottom. And that's going to lead us to bring that rib cage forward. But hey, let me say, this is our first week doing these kinds of activities. I'm super happy that we were able to make the prediction that this would do flexion. I love that we did that on our first try, our first week of working on this. Going forward, we're just going to be doing a whole lot of the exact same thing. You're using your bone markings, we're finding where they are on the skeleton, and then we're figuring out, okay, where's my origin? Where's my insertion? What happens when I bring these things together? I know this activity looks super scary, but I promise it's not. And we'll keep doing it week after week after week till it doesn't scare us anymore. How does that sound? Does that sound good? So Nicole asked how we'll know the origin. So when we're asking you to do prediction questions, we'll color code it, just like you're doing on the assignment. So we'll color code origins as blue, and we'll color code insertions as green. So it'll be just like your best way to study for those kinds of questions on the lab exam is just going to be keep doing these activities at the end of the lab packets. Keep working on making these kinds of predictions. That's all that I specifically wanted to cover with you guys today. Are there any other things from this lab packet that we wanted to talk about? We got a little bit of time left. Or do we just want to let it all sink in? Because that's totally fair too. We talked about a lot, didn't we? Yeah, Tierney wants to let it sink in. Okay, Jacqueline wants to go back to the ischium. Do you want to go back to it in invisible body or just on the picture? What would you prefer? Picture. Okay, let's go back. This picture or the other picture? The other one. Okay. Okay, so when we are we're looking at the pelvis, we're wanting to know the location of the ischial tuberosity. Is that our biggest question here? Location of it? From this view, we'll remind ourselves the pubis is up here in the front. The ischium is the bone that extends towards the back, the ischium. It's a little bit challenging to see the ischial tuberosity on this one, but I would say the best place to see it is kind of right there. You can see it on this side, it's kind of curving back. So see, I'm circling some of the stuff on the front, but imagine that this is toward the back side. So this stuff back here, remember the ischial tuberosity is what we sit on. So it's kind of back here behind, or you can see a little bit of it sticking out over here. Nicole has her hand up and Jacqueline has something in the chat. Go ahead, Nicole.
I think we have the same question. Can I mark on the picture to show you what we're talking about?
Yeah, here, I'll clear it out for you. Go ahead.
There's a place where you have to label this. It's marked like this and it has a letter or a number. And we don't know what these two little sides to this are.
That is an interesting question. Let me check something really fast.
Was that what your question was too, Jacqueline?
That's a little, I believe that's a little too far forward to be them, but I'm gonna check on our attempt here to see what we actually have it coded as. Bear with me. Sorry.
On my last attempt, I got it right and I put it as tuberosity in the ischium.
Okay. Yeah, so that is what it's coded as. That's not, I personally feel like the location of that is a little bit farther back because it is, like I said, it is what you sit on. So I'm not a huge fan of that, but that is what it is coded at, correct. So ischial tuberosity, the way I want you to remember it is what you sit on. Whether we flag it toward the front side or I like it so much better in this view here because it's a little more obvious that it's kind of back a little bit way here. But yeah, so for everyone who's working on the homework assignment here, when you see a flag on these guys right here, they are keyed as our ischial tuberosity. I like it better back here, but let's just pretend that it's part of the ischial tuberosity there. So ischial tuberosity is keyed on your assignment. It's pointing to these two parts here on the ischium. We'll call that the ischial tuberosity. Yeah, so Nicole wants me to go to the other side. Yeah, so the blue is the ischium bone. Yep, so the ischium bone, it does start up here, but I think that's why I like it better toward the back because half of this is still the pubic bone. So ischium is my bone that's kind of back in this region. Yeah, so I like it better back here, but the homework assignment has this keyed as that ischial tuberosity. So we'll go with that. When we're looking at it from the side, here's the pubic bone toward the front. Here's the ischium bone. I would say the best place that we see it here is kind of this rounded tuberosity right here on the side. So a tuberosity is a flat, large surface. That's where I would say that it's located. I don't know do we have that on the homework assignment? Let me see. I'm gonna browse through the view. Yeah, so it looks like where it's flagged on the homework assignment, that one's closer to where I was expecting. So I don't know, Jacqueline, let me check. Yeah, I don't know what to say on that, Jacqueline, saying you keep getting it wrong. So I believe that the marking here is ischial tuberosity. We do also have a marking up here as well. That's that ischial spine that we talked about. So the spine is the thing up higher, down below it is the tuberosity. Spine and tuberosity. I bet you guys can hear my my husband and my daughter. Any other particular questions? Well, while we're typing questions, I'll mention they're having the time of their lives with these little $1 inflatable lightsabers. I call it the little junkies section at the front of Target. It's like my favorite place in the world is to go there. So they have these little $1 lightsabers. So I got them, one for my husband and one for my daughter, and they are playing with them now. So yeah, Gloria's asking thorax and abdomen, internal view, this one right here. Perfect. Okay. So here's what I'll say to help us with the labeling. Our big tip off here is the wording superficial to deep. What does the word superficial mean? I'm going to put that to the chat. What does superficial mean in the body? Yeah, so superficial means we're closer to the surface of the skin, right? Deep means we're closer to the middle of the body. When we're looking at your abdomen, there are 3 layers of muscles that make up the abdomen. And here I'm actually gonna, let me see if I can pull up visible body really fast. Let me share my screen. Files, here we go. Let me pull up the screen because I want to dissect with you guys actually to look at these things. So we're gonna go to our practice and I'm gonna pull up the muscles. All right, here's my muscle man. I'm gonna zoom in here. When I am on the outside of the abdomen, my outermost layer, my most superficial layer of the abdomen are the external obliques. So when you're working on labeling, I know the picture is different than this one, but bear with me here. The most superficial layer of the abdominal muscles is the external oblique muscle. If I take away the external oblique muscle, the muscle that I find immediately underneath it is the internal oblique muscle. So to use a word that we mentioned during this morning's session, the internal oblique muscle is called intermediate. It's the middle layer. If I take away the internal oblique muscle and go all the way to the innermost layer, to the deepest layer, I hit a layer called transversus abdominis. Transversus abdominis is that transverse word that we talked about where it goes perpendicular to the middle of the body. So transversus abdominis, when you're looking at that view in the internal part of the thorax, and it asks for the one that's the most deep or the one that actually shows up in the internal thorax, what you're looking at is transversus abdominis. And then the layer just inside of that is the internal oblique, and the superficial most layer is the external oblique. That one other muscle that we see here, and you can see it on the model that you're labeling, is the rectus abdominis. And the rectus word means it goes parallel to the midline. So the rectus abdominis is that last one there. So here, let's briefly go back to our picture, and we'll end with labeling it together here. So the picture we are wanting to get a label on is this one right here. So help me out in the chat. I'm pointing to the most superficial layer. Which was the most superficial layer of the abdominal muscles? Who remembers what that one is? You can totally abbreviate, by the way. I know it's a long name. Most superficial. Yep, so that is the external oblique. I'll type that in for us. External oblique. Thank you, caps lock. What was the layer that we said was the deepest? The layer that is perpendicular to the midline of the body, that deepest layer of abdominal muscles. Yeah, so transversus is the deepest layer, transversus abdominis. No, you're right, Gloria, that we do actually see rectus abdominis really deep too. Rectus abdominis is actually this, I'm going to abbreviate over here. Rectus abdominis is actually this one right here that's super deep. It's just, this one is rectus because it goes up and down, and this one is transversus because it's perpendicular. So transversus here, rectus up and down right here. We've got the external oblique that's on the outside, which means the one that we have left then is the internal oblique. The internal oblique, that's the one, again, to use our word from this morning, that is intermediate, that's in between. So superficial, intermediate, and deep, that's how we would describe these muscles here. Outermost is the external oblique, then that internal oblique, then transversus in the very middle. By the way, the other one that we have labeled on our picture here are those, where'd it go? Internal intercostals. The intercostal muscles are the ones that we see in between the ribs. Since we're looking on the inside in between the ribs, we're seeing the internal intercostals. If we were looking on the outside of the ribs, we would be seeing the external intercostals. I think I saw in the chat that cleared it up, so perfect. Any other last minute questions before we call it a night? All right, well, I will give you guys your little penguin for the night. For those of you that stuck around a little bit earlier this morning, you saw that the penguin was doing biceps curls. So our penguin tonight, since he did his bicep curls, what special food treat should we give our penguin tonight? Because he did his bicep curls this morning. Is he an ice cream penguin? Is he a pizza penguin? What do we think? What treat do you all wish you were having? Let's put it that way. Pizza? Pizza sounds good. Let's give him a slice of pizza. Pizza slice for the penguin, and pizza slice, virtual pizza slice for you guys as well. So glad that we were able to work through this stuff together. As usual, if you have questions, let me know. Oh yeah, maybe we need to do a churro next time. Next time he gets a treat, we'll give him a churro. That sounds good. So now that we've worked on this stuff in class together, go ahead and try to do at least one attempt on the Blackboard homework assignment. Let's get that visible body one knocked out, just so it's done and out of the way. We have a lot going on with lecture this week, right? Because that exam is coming up. So if you can, go ahead and take care of this lab stuff ASAP to get you ready to be able to focus on the lecture stuff toward the end of the week. So I will see you guys again Wednesday morning. We will start covering lesson number 8. We'll wrap it up Thursday morning. But remember, you also have, in addition to the regular lesson number 8 stuff, we are learning about skeletal system disorders as well. So give yourself plenty of time, get this lab stuff done, and then focus on the lecture stuff. Tierney asked when the upcoming test is. It opens up Monday, really early in the morning. So next Monday, really early. Closes next Tuesday, really late. So 48 hours starting next Monday. Yes, you're welcome, Christina. Happy to be able to help you guys. So good luck with your homework assignment. Gloria's asking to clarify. So it is just lab lesson number 7 is the name of the lab lesson. Your homework assignment, it says week 8 because it's week 8. But the week 8 lab covers lesson number 7. The numbers are going to be a little bit funky in lab, but just check those due dates. So lab lesson number 7 this week, lecture lesson number 8, skeletal system. Yes, I know it is a little bit confusing, unfortunately. So check those numbers, check those due dates, you should be good. All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and turn off my mic, stop the recording. I'll stick around for a little bit if you have questions. Otherwise, I hope to see you guys Wednesday morning.